You're with ABC News, where it's 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 6 a.m. in the west, leading our bulletin this hour. Severe tropical cyclone Raela is crossing the Cape York Peninsula in far north Queensland as a high-end Category 4 system. 6 emergency warnings have been activated for people to take shelter now. We have reporters on the ground in Weipa and Port Douglas, and later we'll be speaking with the Federal Emergency Management Minister. Also ahead, the Israeli Prime Minister is denying the United States has been dragged into the Middle East war, calling it fake news. That as the US President Donald Trump insists he won't be sending ground troops into Iran. Modelling for a new tax on gas giants has been requested by the Prime Minister's office as companies rake in huge profits from skyrocketing fuel prices thanks to the Middle East war. We are live to Canberra shortly, where our political reporter has more detail. South Australia's state election campaign has entered its final hours. Candidates will today deliver their last pitch to voters, with polls opening in less than 24 hours. And marking the official end of Ramadan, tens of thousands of worshippers are gathering at mosques across Australia to celebrate Eid al-Fitr. It's Friday, the 20th of March. I'm Kathryn Robinson from the land of the Darug people in Parramatta in Western Sydney. This is ABC News Morning. Severe tropical cyclone Raela is crossing the Cape York Peninsula its east coast as a high-end Category 4 system. Impacts are already being felt, with heavy rain as far south as Cairns and destructive winds of more than 250 kilometres per hour at the centre of the storm. 6 emergency warnings have been issued. They cover Cape York Peninsula between Lockhart River and Cape Flattery on the east coast, and Mapoon and Porampura on the west coast, including Cowan, Weipa and Arakoon. Cooktown, as well as Cape Tribulation to Cape Flattery, are no longer in the warning zone as the cyclone has tracked north. 5 watch and act warnings are in place in the west, covering Porampura, Mapoon, Napram, Arakoon and Weipa. People there are being urged to prepare now. The latest Weather Bureau track map, issued about 10 minutes ago, indicates that Raela is forecast to maintain Category 4 strength as it approaches Cowan before weakening to a Category 2 system as it heads over the western Cape York and into the Gulf. It will then intensify again to a Category 3 as it moves across the Gulf of Carpentaria towards the Northern Territory. We will cross live to our reporters on the ground shortly, but first, the Queensland Premier, David Foley, gave an update alongside authorities a short time ago.
My message to Queenslanders right now is this: we have prepared, you have prepared. The best place right now is for you to remain exactly where you are. The challenges that we are preparing for to hit the coastline are as follows: wind, storm surge, rain, and then the prospect of flooding. Wind is intensifying. In many cases, it'll be the strongest wind that people have experienced in this part of the state for a long, long time. There's a lot of rain in this system, and as it moves, it will be hard and fast. And we're dealing with an area where there are already very saturated catchments. And as a result, the prospect of flash flooding is real. And people in far north Queensland understand where those high-risk areas are. They've been through this before. And we just ask people to take heed of those areas and the prospect that there will be flash flooding experiencing. I want to turn to power. We've already had power lost across that area. There's over 300 outages. Around 73 of those are in the town of Cowan, so there's still a portion of that town with electricity at the moment. But look, I don't want to sugarcoat this. We are going to experience loss of electricity, and the damage is likely to be significant with a system of this size. We mentioned yesterday that there would be the prospect of long-term power outages. Just know that we'll be there to reconnect them, but there is the prospect of those outages to that essential service. To health. All of our health facilities, all of them in that region, have been adequately staffed. We pre-positioned people accordingly. We're very grateful that they were there on the ground. Some of our health facilities have transitioned to emergency services only, but there is help on the ground for people who are needed. To schools, there are 14 schools in the broader area that are closed. Essentially, everything north of the Daintree School on both sides of the Cape will be closed, and that was communicated yesterday afternoon on our disaster.qld.gov.au website, but just a reminder. Final preparations. I want to assure Queenslanders final preparations have been made. You saw the vision of our emergency services staff going door to door. That was still happening this morning. We still had police on the ground in places like Cowan this morning, going door to door, making sure that people were okay. We've had police and other emergency services sweep the area in helicopters. We have swiftwater rescue crews on the ground. We have electricity crews on the ground. Queensland Health staff, ambulance on the ground. And I want to assure the community there will be no daylight between response and recovery. But right now, the message to people is to stay where you are in the remaining hours, as the system has only just started to cross the coast.
And that was the Queensland Premier David Crisafulli giving an update just in the last few moments. Well, ABC senior meteorologist Nate Byrne is in Weipa in far north Queensland, one of the remote communities in the path of the cyclone, and joins me now. Nate, we just heard from the Premier there about power outages. I believe you suffered power outages in the last half an hour. What is Narelle bringing to where you are?
Well, it's taken out my power, Kathryn, so I'm now on batteries, and we're going to try to make them last as long as possible. It's taken out all of my hairspray and it keeps splashing the lens. Richard, thank you. This system, though, is an incredibly serious one, as we heard, crossing the coast right now for the east of Cape York Peninsula. The system's packing wind gusts 250 kilometres an hour. The rain. Now, we've seen some heavy rain here this morning, but we're talking about the potential for 300, maybe 400 millimetres for some communities over the day ahead, as this system cuts a pretty narrow but straight path across Cape York Peninsula. This is a small system, but it is intense. Once it does make landfall, once the centre of the eye gets over land, we should start to see it weakening somewhat. But tell you what, even though we are, about 300 kilometres away here, we are already really feeling it, and things are only going to worsen through the day today. Yeah,
we just heard from the Premier, as I mentioned, Nate, about the challenges that are being posed by the wind, the rain, the flash flooding. Just how fast are these winds, the gusts going to get to, and what are the biggest problems that are being posed by the rainfalls with respect to flooding?
Well, see, it's a bit of all of the above, right? And compounded by the fact, of course, this only happens during wet season. It is wet season, but that means that the ground is soaking already, and trees are it's not gonna take much to bring down trees and structures, things like power lines. The wind gusts we're seeing around the centre, 250 kilometres an hour potentially, that won't last very long once it starts reducing. But even further away, we've got gale force winds likely across the peninsula, including here in Weipa. It's going to be an incredibly windy one. The main problem with all of this is that as the centre passes over an area, first of all, you start experiencing the winds. Since this is going in a westerly direction, you cop the southerlies first, thanks Richard, and then you get a brief lull as the centre of the eye goes over. The rain eases back, the winds back off as well, but then a short time later, you cop the other side of the eye wall, and the winds are now coming at the same speed but in 180 degrees different directions, so you'll be copping northerlies instead. That means trees and structures that have been bracing themselves, against these winds for hours and hours in a short space of time are now experiencing the wind coming from exactly the opposite direction. That's where we see a lot of tree fall and a lot of building damage as well, because the bits of roof that we're managing to hang on are now being pushed in the opposite direction. That makes it particularly dangerous. Communities right across this region are well prepared as they could be. We've had plenty of warning for this system, but this is still really going to pack a punch, and we are likely to see widespread destruction as a result.
So, Nate, we know that Narelle spans from the Lockhart River to Cape Melville. You spoke earlier, I believe, with the Cookshire Mayor, which looks after Cowan, which was one of those areas that is right in the firing line now.
And a place of major concern, because they are likely to get almost a direct hit and that community doesn't have a cyclone shelter. When I was on my way here yesterday, I bumped into some SES people who were deploying. They told me that there are 2 SES personnel in Cohen ready to help to respond on the other side. But yeah, speaking to the mayor, she told me that, look, even though they don't have a cyclone shelter, they are prepared. They've got water ready to go. We've got power outages now, but yeah, it's just time for them to really hunker down. This is what she had to say.
There is no cyclone shelter in Cohen, but there is a building there that's deemed safe enough for people to take refuge in while the passing of the cyclone happens. So that's being managed by the Queensland Police Service, and there's a number of people in there, not a whole lot, but those people who felt that they needed to go to a safer place and they didn't have family or friends to go and bunker down with, are in that facility, and that will be locked down at this point.
That's a story that's going to be repeated across the peninsula, Kath. I mean, I was also talking to a camping ground operator just literally a few minutes away from me. Conditions were too dangerous for me to go and actually speak to her face to face. But she's got people there in caravans that have been told that there are alternatives that they can take. It's right across this region. You know, there are older structures that aren't prepared, and people are, if they haven't already gone to their cyclone protected places, should be going there right now.
OK, Nate, talk to me about the trajectory. Just how long is Narelle going to take to pass through northern Queensland before it then re-intensifies and hits the already soaken Northern Territory?
This is the thing, right? Narelle, it's going to be with us for quite some time, and once it's done with Cape York Peninsula, it's not done with Australia. So I'm expecting we'll see the cyclone passing just south of where I am, probably tonight, 7 p.m, 10 p.m. It depends on exactly how it interacts with the land, whether it slows down a little bit. From there, though, it pops back out into the Gulf of Carpentaria, where the waters are warm, and it's warm waters that are the fuel for cyclones. So we'll likely see it rapidly re-intensifying to a Category 3 system. Now, if that happens, that's going to be a bigger headache for us here, having just dealt with it as a 2. As it moves away, it'll start re-intensifying. So that means that the western parts of the peninsula could be dealing with this for an extended period of time. But then, yep, straight over to the east of the top end. Now, once it makes landfall later on this weekend, it is likely to rapidly weaken to a tropical low, but don't think that that's going to stop it from having severe impacts. The winds may die down a little bit, but the heavy rain is expected to continue, and it's likely to track essentially right over those communities of Kathryn, Daly River, where, well, for the last week or so, we've been there every day reporting on those unusual riverine rises and the major flooding that's continuing, with hundreds of millimetres of rain more to come there. The Territory is really holding its breath. And then, Kath, I'm not ruling out it popping out into the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf and bothering the north of WA, maybe as a cyclone again. We could get 3 bites at Tropical Cyclone Narelle while she takes some bites out of us. OK. Nate, we'll leave it with you for now, but we will cross back to you throughout the morning. That's Nate Byrne there in Weipa in Queensland. Well, as Nate mentioned there is an inland town of Cohen, and that's on the Cape's east side, and it's currently under a take shelter warning. Cohen local Sarah Watkins joins me now from the shelter that she is in. Sarah, thank you very much for your time. What's it like right now in Cohen?
Hi, good morning. It's windy to say the least, and we've had torrential rain since 7 o'clock last night. The wind, didn't actually start until about 4 o'clock this morning, and it has increased over time. We were just outside taking some photos and videos for our own documentation, and we can see the Langkelly River at the back of the property, and at the back of the Exchange pub is rising significantly. We've also been watching the flood cameras. So the Cookshire have a great disaster board for flood cameras. And we've seen that the Cohen River is over the bridge as well now.
What are the greatest concerns that you have for Cohen? Is it about damage to structures, isolation, or this riverine flooding that you're suggesting here?
Yeah, so we're pretty used to isolation. We're a very resilient community. I think my biggest worry is damage to infrastructure, damage to property. As Nate mentioned before, some of the town are out of power. We're fortunate to still have power at the moment. But, you know, as soon as the buildings get damaged or the power lines get damaged, we're relying on Ergon to come up as soon as it's safe for them to do so. I think business interruption is going to be a bit of a hardship for a while, but we've got great support from Cookshire Council, and they'll do a food supply drop as soon as it's safe.
OK, I want to ask you about supplies in just a moment, but with respect to where you're finding shelter and safe shelter, I understand that there is no such cyclone shelter in the town, but there is a building or a couple of buildings that are safe. Can you tell me where residents have gone?
Yeah, so there are a number of cyclone-rated buildings in town, the newer ones especially. It's the older buildings that are going to suffer. In terms of where I am, our friends at the Exchange have been kind enough to let us set refuge here, so we're in a solid office backspace of the pub at the moment. A lot of the community have gone to the Apunapina building, which is a wellness centre, which is also a brick building. Yes, you are right. There isn't a designated cyclone shelter that's for these types of disasters. But I mean, I think it's a bit of an eye-opener for everybody to get some funding and get that sorted.
You run the general store and the petrol station, I believe, there in Cohen. You mentioned supplies before. How difficult has it been in the lead up to this to get supplies? How prepared are you to wait it out until it's business as usual?
Yeah, so myself at the Little Bush Pantry and Esan at Armbrust, which is another store over the road, we've been working together to, to speak about what supplies we have. For the town, we think we can last at least 10 days if we can't get help in. As long as power comes back on, our frozen stock should be fine. We have a lot of tin supplies still. Drinking water we don't have, but the council is sorting water for us.
So if you were to speak directly to either the state authorities or the federal authorities with respect to what you think you might need, what is that?
Yes, so we'll definitely need food and water drop as soon as it's safe to do so. We're really fortunate to have extra SES on hand, extra police, ambulance and fire. They've been helping us with preparing for this and, giving us a bit of peace of mind, letting us know what to expect. So I think it's really just going to come down to when we can get some fresh food supplies.
And hardship payments, given you're not only a resident there, but you're also a business operator?
Yeah, so I guess same as after Jasper, we'll look out for some grants. We're really hoping that our building won't be damaged, though.
Yes, as we all are as well. Just finally, one last word, Sarah. How are the residents feeling in the lead up to this? What is the vibe in the town?
Yeah, so there was a bit of anxiety, but everyone got themselves prepared. They stocked up on food. We sold an awful lot of camping gas stoves. So, everyone's really ready for it. The Kalan crews and the regional corporation pulled together and were doing runs to help clear out people's gardens, ready for the cyclone to hit.
Sarah Watkins, Cohen local business owner. Stay safe. Thank you very much for your time and all the very best over the ensuing hours and days.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, let's head a little further down the east coast now. Our reporter, Chloe Shemicki, is in Port Douglas. Good morning to you, Chloe. What's the latest where you are?
Yeah, good morning. Well, conditions here are certainly a lot milder than what they are where our meteorologist Nate Byrne is, and of course in Cohen, where severe tropical cyclone Narelle is crossing to the north as a high-end Category 4 system. But that's not to say we haven't experienced wild weather here in Port Douglas, which is a ways away from the warning zone. Last night there were really strong sustained winds and big gusts, heavy rainfall moving through in bands, and we checked the rainfall totals this morning, over 60 millimetres since yesterday. What we're seeing now though is that as that warning zone contracts and this system makes landfall, conditions have dropped off here. We're not seeing as much of that wind and rain, and things are getting back to normal. We've seen council workers and street sweepers out this morning because the roads were just covered in debris, and it was a bit surprising to see. It speaks though to the ferocity of this system, which, as I mentioned, is crossing 500 k's to the north of where I am. What we are seeing though, and even south of here in Port Douglas, down as far south of Cairns. Is that storm surge playing a role? And we heard from Queensland Premier David Crisafulli earlier speaking of coastal erosion happening along the east coast of the Cape York Peninsula. So those are some of the effects that could be stretching down well south of where this cyclone is crossing. Also, that heavy rainfall, it's affecting catchments all the way down just to the north of Townsville. And because we've had such a relentless wet season, there's a real danger of life-threatening flash flooding in so many parts. We have big flood watches in place now. Really, though, the main focus is for that community of Cohen. As you just touched on with your guest earlier, many people there will be taking shelter, particularly for hours now. That's what the advice has been. We know that there were a couple of dozen people who had to take shelter in council places of refuge because there is no cyclone shelter there that's dedicated for events like this. But the advice for people who are sheltering at home and felt safe to do so is to be doing that in a safe room at the moment. And we're just watching that path of severe tropical cyclone Raela. It's expected to affect the far north for 12 to 18 hours today, and of course re-intensifying after it crosses the west coast of the Cape York Peninsula.
Chloe Schmicki in Port Douglas, Queensland, thank you. And if you are in far north Queensland, you can keep up to date with the latest information on ABC Local Radio. Now, those frequencies are in Cohen, 105.9 FM, Cooktown, 105.7 FM, Lakeland, 106.1 FM, Laura, 106.1 FM, Mossman, Port Douglas and the Daintree, 6:39 AM, and in Weipa, 10:44 AM. You can also get updates on the ABC Emergency website and the ABC Listen app. Well, the Albanese government is quietly exploring options to impose a new windfall tax on gas companies as they rake in profits from soaring energy prices during the war in the Middle East. Political reporter Isabel Rowe joins me now from Parliament House in Canberra. Good morning to you, Isabel. Now, the government has resisted calls for a policy such as this so far. What's changed?
Well, as you say, the war in the Middle East is making the Treasury model all sorts of scenarios about Australia's impacts and what could possibly happen. We can reveal this morning that the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet has asked Treasury to model a bunch of scenarios that could essentially get some extra tax from gas and thermal coal companies to help shield Australians from what could be an economic shock as a result of the war in the Middle East. Specifically, the Prime Minister's Department has asked for modelling on a new gas levy and further changes to the petroleum resources rent tax, which is charged to oil and gas companies. Now, the idea of a windfall tax is something that has been floated many times before. It's been pushed by various independents and Greens, but it's not something the government has taken up. Advocates for it, though, say that these gas companies are making enormous profits during the war because of soaring energy prices, but Australians, meanwhile, see their energy bills go up, and they would like to see some of those profits that the gas giants are making be able to be passed on to Australians via extra tax. So, Isabel, what's the response been from the Treasurer? Well, we haven't had a response from the Treasurer's office to our story, but Jim Chalmers, when you look at what he's been saying, has been talking about tax reform. He made a speech yesterday in Melbourne on the budget, which is coming up in May, and he talked about making Australians beneficiaries, not victims, of the global turmoil and the crises that we continue to see around the world. Now, the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, was asked this morning on Radio National Breakfast whether he would rule something like this out, and he didn't say he would.
The Treasurer's made clear that tax reform is on the government's agenda and is considering the way to maximise the efficient collection of tax in Australia. But that's not something that I'm focused on at the moment. At the moment, I'm focused on fuel supply for Australians and energy prices coming down.
Now, this is, of course, in the modelling stage. It's not a decision that government has taken, but there were hints in the document that the ABC has seen that the Treasurer could announce his intention to do something like this in the coming weeks ahead of the budget. And if he did, there would be support from the Greens, from independent MPs, from many in the crossbench who say that the Australian people aren't getting as much as they should be from windfall gas company profits.
Isabel Rowe, thank you. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is backing the US president's claim that Israel acted alone in striking Iran's South Pars natural gas field. The US President Trump posted on social media that the US was unaware of Israel's plan to strike the facility and said no more attacks will be made by Israel. Mr Netanyahu has since confirmed Israel acted alone and confirmed the US president has attacked Israel not to attack again.
I told him, don't do that, and he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we're independent, we get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
Fact number one, Israel acted alone against the Slawiya gas compound. Fact number two, President Trump asked us to hold off on future attacks, and we're holding out.
The comments come amid uncertainty within the top ranks of the US administration on whether or not Israel and the United States are in sync. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has told US lawmakers that American and Israeli objectives are not the same.
The Israeli government has been focused on disabling the Iranian leadership and taking out several members, obviously beginning with the Ayatollah, the supreme leader. The president has stated that his objectives are to destroy Iran's ballistic missile launching capability, their ballistic missile production capability, and their Navy, the IRGC Navy and mine-laying capability.
And to what do you attribute Israel's decision to strike Iranian energy infrastructure, despite President Trump's call to keep those facilities off limits?
I don't have an answer.
Earlier this week, longtime Trump ally and aide to Tulsi Gabbard, Joe Kent, resigned as counter-terrorism chief, saying he could not support the ongoing war, which he said started due to pressure from Israel. In an interview with Conservative commentator Tucker Carlson, Mr Kent elaborated on his resignation, saying Israel drove the decision to initiate the war, something Benjamin Netanyahu has strongly denied.
Who is in charge of our policy in the Middle East? Who is in charge of when we decide to go to war or not? In this case, with what the Secretary described and later on the President, later on the Speaker of the House, and the way the events played out, the Israelis drove the decision to take this action, which we knew would set off a series of events, meaning the Iranians would retaliate.
And I want to close these opening remarks with one other fake news, and that is that Israel somehow dragged the U.S. into a conflict with Iran. Does anyone really think that someone can tell President Trump what to do? Come on.
US President Donald Trump says there are no plans to send troops to Iran, claiming the war is ahead of schedule. President Trump says he's told Israel not to repeat attacks on Iranian natural gas infrastructure as tit-for-tat strikes send energy prices soaring.
Day 20 of this war and the conflict is escalating. After Israel hit Iran's South Pars gas field, a key source of domestic energy for Iran's civilian population, Tehran struck the Ras Laffan processing plant in neighbouring Qatar, part of the world's largest natural gas field. Qatar's Prime Minister said such attacks had to stop.
This attack will have huge repercussions on our oil and our energy supplies around the world. Such an attack does not bring any benefits to any country. However, it brings harm and damage to the nations and impacts them and affects them directly.
Israel continues to face drone and missile attacks, such as this one on the port city of Haifa, where an oil refinery was targeted. But it's insisted that its targeting of the South Pars gas field was a legitimate military target. In Washington, greeting the Japanese Prime Minister, President Trump has already denied knowing ahead of time about Israel's attack, leading some to raise questions over signs of diverging war aims between Israel and Washington.
Mr. President, have you talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu about attacking the oil and gas fields?
Yeah, I did. I told him don't do that, and he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we do. We're independent. We get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
These US bombers took off in the last couple of hours on their latest mission from RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, after President Trump said he would destroy Iran's gas fields if it continued to attack Arab Gulf neighbours. Tehran remains defiant, the country's president writing on social media, "This will complicate the situation and could have uncontrollable consequences, the scope of which could engulf the entire world." Earlier at the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said there was no timeline for the ending of the war, insisting the US was in control of the conflict.
We hold the cards. We have objectives. Those objectives are clear. We have allies pursuing objectives as well. And the truth speaks for itself. I mean, President Trump was very clear about that.
This war began because President Trump said Iran's nuclear program posed an imminent threat to the United States. Indeed, Washington went out of its way to emphasize it wanted Iran's energy infrastructure protected. But with Israel broadening its targets and other countries in the region increasingly being drawn in, the US risks losing control of the whole direction of this conflict.
This is ABC News. I'm Kathryn Robinson, and these are the top stories we're following this morning. Severe tropical cyclone Raela is crossing the Cape York Peninsula in far north Queensland as a high Category 4 system. 7 emergency warnings to take shelter now are in place. The impact is being felt as far south as Cairns, with destructive winds of more than 250 kilometres per hour at the centre of the storm. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is insisting the US has not been dragged into the Middle East war by Israel. Mr. Netanyahu blasted the suggestions in a press conference, labelling it fake news. Meantime, the US President Donald Trump says he will not be sending ground troops into Iran. The Prime Minister's Department has requested Treasury modelling on a new tax on gas companies drawing large profits from energy price surges. It is part of a potential plan to shield Australians from the economic shock of the Middle East war. Treasury has also been asked to look into reforms to the petroleum resources rent tax. And the South Australian election campaign has entered its final hours, with voters to head to the polls tomorrow. Key issues this election have been housing, cost of living and health. Labor is widely expected to retain power, with the Liberal opposition facing a polling threat from One Nation. Well, let's get more on our top story now. Tropical cyclone Raela. Angus Hines is a senior meteorologist with the Bureau of Meteorology and is with me now. Good morning to you, Angus. Thanks for your time.
Good morning.
Now, we know that Tropical Cyclone Raela has made landfall. Where is it currently? Which areas are being directly impacted?
Yeah, it has made landfall about 2 hours ago to the northeast of Cohen on the Cape York Peninsula in North Queensland as a severe tropical cyclone Category 4, and it is currently moving westward across the peninsula, and it's carving a path between Lockhart River and Cohen at the moment. So those two communities in particular are near the central crossing point of where this tropical cyclone is currently located, and it is right around the central core of the system where those winds are expected to be the strongest. So it's expected or forecast that those winds around the centre of the weather system at the moment could be upwards of 200 kilometres an hour. That is extremely powerful wind gusts. That's certainly enough to bring down entire trees or take off all their branches, cause lots of debris to fly around dangerously in the air and cause damage to property. Now, the strongest observations we've seen have been a little bit further away from the centre of the system, and we're already seeing average wind speeds in excess of 100 kilometres an hour in those locations, and it will be even stronger towards the centre of the system. Not to mention, alongside this dangerous and destructive wind, lots of rainfall has already been accumulating and will continue to fall heavily today, leading to risks of flash flooding and rivers rising and bursting their banks as well.
Where are some of those rivers expected to rise and potentially burst their banks with the rain that is coming with this system?
Well, that could really happen anywhere across the Cape York Peninsula. We've in fact got a flood watch in place that goes all the way down to the Herbert River down south of Cairns. But in particular, the rivers that we'd be most concerned with are probably around the Daintree River northwards. So any rivers, creeks and streams across the Cape York Peninsula could see a lot of water arriving in their catchment zones at the moment, and that could lead to some downstream impacts. But it's not just along the river network where we could see flooding. The intensity of the rainfall can lead to flash flooding anywhere where the rain is heaviest, and that includes places in the north and west of the Cape York Peninsula, from Mapoon down to Weipa. We've seen some quite heavy rain there, already upwards of 100 millimetres through the course of this morning, with more on the way, so we could certainly see some flooding in those regions as well.
And what are you expecting with respect to the tides on the coast? The Queensland Premier, David Christofouli, had mentioned to brace for those sorts of areas.
Yeah, across the east coast of Queensland, from the far northern tip of the Cape York Peninsula down to the north tropical coast, down towards Cairns, and even areas further south of that are likely to see a significant storm tide with their high tide this morning. So that means basically the tropical cyclone pushes extra water towards the coast, and when that occurs at high tide time, your high tide level becomes higher than it typically would. And of course, if you get water higher than an average high tide, that can lead to inundation and flooding of low-lying coastal areas. That is definitely possible. That will be most severe near the tropical cyclone on the Cape York Peninsula, but we will be seeing some of that, and I believe we have already been seeing some very high water levels down around Cairns. That looks to be mostly an issue through the course of this morning. Then, of course, the tide relaxes and heads out, that water level drops, and hopefully by the time the next high tide comes in tonight, we shouldn't be seeing quite such the same level of impact.
Yeah, can you just round out, Angus, and take me through where this cyclone is expected to track over the next few hours, and then indeed into the next couple of days, when it is expected to re-intensify when it visits into the Northern Territory?
Absolutely. So over the next few hours, it's going to cross westwards across the Cape York Peninsula. So it arrived at the east coast. It is going to move over the next about 12 hours or so right across the peninsula. It is going to move likely south of Weipa and then get across to the Gulf of Carpentaria coastline by around about 9 or 10 p.m. this evening. So the focus for today is this weather system crossing the Cape York Peninsula, but tonight it leaves Queensland, moves back into the water of the Gulf of Carpentaria, and is likely to strengthen there tomorrow on Saturday. It will continue to move westward, which means it will move towards the Northern Territory on Saturday, likely to arrive on the Northern Territory coast late on the day on Saturday, heading into early Sunday morning. The forecast is that we could be seeing a Category 3 severe tropical cyclone impacting the Northern Territory tomorrow evening, and we have already got some preemptive tropical cyclone watch areas in place from Nhulunbuy down to Borroloola, and we're anticipating that coastal crossing on the Northern Territory side of the border to occur somewhere north of Nooka, likely late tomorrow. So the weekend focus will shift away from Queensland and towards the NT, with widespread rain and heavy winds across the top end. This is particularly significant for areas that were hit very hard by flooding in the last fortnight, including Daly River, Kathryn and Beswick, because there will be a significant dump of rain onto those regions. It's sort of the last thing they're hoping for, as they're just recovering in some of those places from the last round of flooding.
Angus Hines, thank you very much for that update. Let's head to the Northern Territory now, because it will be a nervous 24 hours for people in Kathryn, as Angus just mentioned, who are still reeling after recent severe flooding, with Raela likely to dump even more rain as it moves from the Cape York Peninsula across into the Gulf, into the top end. Our reporter James Elton is in Kathryn and is with me now. James, a very good morning to you. I mean, it looks quite beautiful, although the sky's a little foreboding behind you. Just how are preparations going in the Northern Territory?
Hey, yeah, looks can be deceptive, can't they? It's a beautiful sunny morning right now in Kathryn. As you say, the immediate areas of concern are going to be those communities out in the eastern side of Arnhem Land. There's been a substantial effort underway over the course of yesterday to evacuate residents from the coastal Arnhem Land community of Numbulwar to Darwin. That's involved the assistance of the Defence Force, and those efforts have been going all through yesterday and are ongoing. Everyone is expected to be out of Numbulwar pretty well today. And then the remaining communities out there in the east coast of Arnhem Land, places like Borroloola and Groote Island, where the cyclone is actually expected to hit, The plan there is for people to basically shelter in place. Additional police resources have been sent to some of those communities just to help manage that situation. Concern too for the Southeast Arnhem Land community of Nooka. That's a big Aboriginal community out there. And then it will head inland. And by the time it gets to me here in Kathryn, it's likely that it will have downgraded to a tropical low, but it's making it quite a long way in at substantial strength. And as your previous reporter mentioned, this is not good news. I mean, people here were just starting to get on with the flood cleanup process. There's a lot of houses that have been, you know, pressure cleaned out, finally got all the muck out, but no one's putting anything back in them just yet because they may need to be hosed out again. We'll just have to wait and see. At this stage, the flood warnings are in place for the Kathryn River and for other rivers around this part of the top end. But and sandbagging efforts are recommencing as we speak. But the Bureau is saying they do expect significant river rises for the Kathryn River on Sunday. Whether they get up as high as that major once-in-30-year flood that we saw 2 weeks ago, that remains to be seen. One thing that's giving people a little bit of hope is that the Bureau is saying this tropical low, or currently a cyclone, will then be a tropical low, is moving very fast. The last low 2 weeks ago just sat on top of us for days and dumped a lot of rain. So there is some glimmer of hope that if it moves across quickly, maybe we'll get off a little bit lighter this time around.
Still some nervous times ahead. James Elton joining us there from Kathryn. Thank you. Well, the federal government insists there is enough fuel in Australia at the moment as people continue to panic buy. Let's get more from political reporter Stephanie Boris, who joins us now from Canberra. Good morning to you, Steffi. Just how is supply tracking at the moment?
Good morning, Kath. Well, to put this all into context, 90% of Australia's fuel comes from overseas, and that's why we're having ongoing discussions about the cost of fuel and the supply of fuel, because we're so reliant on countries overseas, and that reliance has been brought into question because of the war in the Middle East. Now, the government has been saying for some time now that all the contracted ships due to arrive in Australia are still expected to make it throughout March and into early April. But there are some questions about what happens towards the end of April. Energy Minister Chris Bowen saying that that isn't clear. And that is because we don't know what is going on with the war in the Middle East, how long it will last, what the implications are, and what resources can or can't get out of the Middle East. So the government, for what it's worth, yesterday held that national cabinet meeting. They announced a national coordinator that will essentially just be ensuring that the bureaucrats and the state governments and the industry can all talk better together. So at the moment, Kath, supply is fine, but there are question marks about what happens later down the track. The government's been very keen to press and stress that people shouldn't be panic buying, but that message doesn't seem to be getting through. The question is why? Is it partly due to government messaging? Is it that people don't trust what the government's saying? I think part of it too is that sometimes the messaging hasn't been clear enough, or that there isn't enough information being provided. For example, we know that some of the emergency stockpile has been used, but there's no clear clarification as to whether that's even hit petrol stations yet or not.
Steph, we have heard and seen stations without diesel in particular. How widespread is your understanding of that problem?
Well, for the first time today, Kath, we've actually got confirmation from the government around figures, and I think that sort of helps us understand how widespread the problem is or isn't when we've got actual numbers in front of us. The Energy Minister Chris Bowen this morning on RN Breakfast saying that the number of stations with no or low amounts of fuel was in less than double digits, so something under 10% of petrol stations nationwide. He didn't give us the exact figure, but it gives us a little bit of an understanding. That said, Minister Bowen went on to say, even though that's considered a small number, it's a big problem for those people in those areas that can't get the petrol they need. But once again, stressing the supply is there, it's just the demand has gone up more.
Stephanie Boris, thank you. Well, South Australia's state election campaign has entered its final hours with voters to head to the polls tomorrow. Labor, under Premier Peter Malinauskas, is widely expected to retain power. Throughout the campaign, the ABC has been asking voters to share their key election issues using ABC's online forum Your Say. Reporter Stephanie Holder has been going through the responses.
A lot of you have told the ABC what matters most to you this election. Unsurprisingly, the results have varied hugely, but there have been some common threats. The environment, housing, transport, the health system and government spending have been among the issues that have come up most. About 20% of all the responses highlighted the environment as a key concern, like Tara, who says she's concerned about a lack of focus on the environment, biodiversity and habitat. When it comes to transport, there's been lots of views too. There's a huge appetite for more rail, especially to regional areas and the Adelaide Hills. But plenty of people want other options too, like Jennifer, who'd like more public transport and active transport, and Marthu, who'd like more cycling infrastructure. The state of the health system has been front of mind for many. Linda says healthcare is a real concern, specifically more access to the public system. Government spending has also been brought up. Karen is concerned there's a focus on sporting events and wants better healthcare, while Bernie wants to see state debt reduced. Housing has unsurprisingly come up often. David is concerned about the housing situation for young people, and Mary says housing affordability and cost of living need to be addressed. These are just some of the things you've told us matter. But tomorrow is the day where you can tell the politicians with your vote.
Sophie Holder with that report there. Well, to Alice Springs now, and people are slowly picking up the pieces from February's massive flood. Many homeowners are facing huge insurance excess payments because flood mitigation measures have been ignored for years. Emma Haskin has this story.
A freak flood catches a desert town off guard. Alice Springs woke to find the Todd and the Charles Rivers bursting, prompting last-minute emergency warnings of imminent danger.
The kids think it was great because they didn't realise how dangerous it was, but I couldn't drive them out in the car.
It was a lucky escape for the Dardick family after their rented industrial property on the Stewart Highway was swamped.
The moment I opened this door, I caused the river to come flowing through.
And they're still counting the cost.
The mess, man, the mess was around here. It took me 2 days just to clean up all the mess here.
Member for Araluen, Robin Lamley, says the town narrowly avoided disaster and that successive governments have stalled flood mitigation works in the region because of the cost. She's appealed to the Northern Territory Government to act.
We can't keep delaying it year after year. As time goes on, it's clear that we are in for a hell of a flood imminently.
The inaction on flood mitigation is driving up insurance premiums in the area, with some companies charging eye-watering amounts for cover. Shaz Kearns is paying the price.
We're paying over $5,000 in home and contents insurance. We've got a massive excess, which is $3,000 for our home and $1,500 for our contents.
In years past, she's been quoted $24,000 for home insurance, even though her house is not in the designated flood zone.
It's a condition of our mortgage that we must have certain insurance. So if it becomes unaffordable to insure our house, we'll have to sell our house.
In 2017, the Northern Territory Government Alice Springs Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee released a report which made recommendations to reduce the risk of flooding in the outback town. It included a review of the drainage infrastructure and building retention basins in the Todd River catchment to control and slow the flow of water through the town. The most expensive recommendation was to widen the Todd River course through Heavy Tree Gap and to raise the Stewart Highway and the Adelaide to Darwin rail corridor. But a decade on, nothing has happened.
There is no other way to get services right through the Territory if this is cut off. So this is a very important infrastructure piece. It's a national highway. It's very much the responsibility of the federal government.
For residents facing rising premiums, the lack of action is frightening.
It makes me feel sick. That's not affordable for us, and it's really concerning.
In a statement, the Minister for Lands and Planning, Joshua Burgoyne, says he is in discussions with the federal government about flood mitigation in Alice Springs and will return to Canberra at the end of the month for further meetings. Emma Haskin, ABC News.
Well, hecklers have booed the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Minister for Home Affairs Tony Burke during an Eid celebration in Sydney's southwest. Our reporter Max Tillman is at Lakemba Mosque and joins me now. Max, what exactly happened this morning?
Good morning. Well, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke, who is the local member here in Sydney's west, were entering Lakemba Mosque this morning for Eid prayers. They arrived just after those first prayers concluded at around 7:30 a.m. They were here as guests of the Lebanese Muslim Association, and Jamel Keir, who is the secretary of that organisation. What we saw inside the mosque was essentially Mr Keir making a speech to the worshippers who were present, effectively giving the message that it was important for the Lebanese Muslim Association to engage with political figures like the Prime Minister. He said that it was important for the organisation or the association to effectively not isolate itself from federal politics. It was at that point that a number of worshippers, or those who were inside the mosque at the time, began heckling the Prime Minister, as well as Mr Burke and Mr Keir, who are all sitting quite close together at the time. We understand that one of those individuals who was inside the mosque at the time was removed by security, but certainly the mood did quite quickly change. That crowd was moving closer and closer towards the Prime Minister. We had a chance to speak to some people who were making their way out of the mosque. They mainly aired their frustration with the Prime Minister's presence. In fact, a few people that we spoke to said that their frustration was really aimed at the Lebanese Muslim Association for giving the Prime Minister an invitation to the mosque this morning on what is a very holy day, the end of the holy month of Ramadan. And at the same time, it was very soon after that the Prime Minister and Tony Burke were escorted out of the prayer hall itself, and very shortly after made their exit.
So, Max, this comes as Muslims around the country are celebrating the end of Ramadan, as you mentioned.
It does indeed. Eid al-Fitr, which is essentially the breaking of the fast. That's what that effectively means in Arabic. What we've seen throughout the morning were thousands and thousands of people spilling out of the mosque itself. In fact, behind us at about 7:30 in this morning, there was a large spillover area for those worshippers who were not able to make their way into the mosque itself. Those prayers were conducted at about 7:30 a.m. in the morning. Now, what the celebrations really are about once those initial prayers are concluded is a time for family and friends to gather, to celebrate, and most importantly, to share food. In fact, we had a chance to speak to some locals around the area. They were telling us that a really big part of Eid is to pay alms or donations to those less fortunate. They also say that a really big part of the Eid celebrations are food, particularly sweet and savoury, and spending time with family as well. So Eid generally runs for the first 3 days of the 10th month of the Islamic calendar, but in some countries and some cultures indeed, those celebrations can run for much longer. So most people have now retired home to spend time with their families.
Max Tillman, thank you for the update. Actor Kevin Spacey has reached a confidential settlement with 3 British men who'd filed civil lawsuits accusing him of sexual assault. 2 of the men gave evidence during the actor's 4-week criminal trial 3 years ago, which cleared him of all charges. The 66-year-old has consistently denied accusations against him, saying the alleged incidents either didn't happen or were consensual. The first group of people from Tuvalu are beginning their new lives in Australia after securing a landmark visa. It's part of something called the Whalepili Union, which is creating a dedicated migration pathway for people impacted by climate change. But as Jordan Fennell found out, many Tuvaluans still don't see themselves as climate migrants.
I'm here at the narrowest part of Funafuti, the capital of Tuvalu, and just over there you can see the open ocean with that sea breeze just roaring across. And then In just a few steps across this road, we come right to the lagoon. The water here in Tuvalu is so close, and the country is completely exposed to the impacts of climate change and rising sea levels. But not far from here, you can see just across the ocean there, that strip of yellow. That's actually brand new land that's been built on top of the ocean to raise Tuvalu out of harm's way. It's being funded and built by Australia and other international partners, and actually sits 6 meters above sea level and is meant to keep Tuvalu safe from cyclones, big coastal tides and rising sea levels until the year 2100. But despite adaptation measures like this, for many people, the future here still feels uncertain, which is one of the reasons there's been high demand for the Whalapili mobility pathway visas, which allow 280 Tuvaluans to live, work and study in Australia each year. I've been speaking with people here who have secured this visa for the first year, and while climate change is a factor for some of them, it's not the whole story. Rejecting the idea that they're climate migrants, they've told me that there's a lack of health and education resources here, pressure on housing, overcrowding in the capital as people move from the outer islands, and that's pushing them out. They're also being drawn to higher wages and more opportunities for their children in Australia. The people that I've been speaking to tell me that this choice to leave, though, is a really heartbreaking decision. Tuvaluans are deeply connected to their land, to their community, and to their culture. And to the many people who are choosing to leave, they're hoping that there's still going to be a Tuvalu to come home to.
Jordan Fennell with that report there. Well, it's time for sport now with Johnson Raela.
Jack Gunston has booted 4 goals, including 2 in the final term, as the Hawks down the Swans at the MCG. Sydney led by as much as 20 points in the third quarter before the Hawks kicked into gear. Gunston put his side in front and then also kicked the sealer in the 17-point win. Both sides are now 2 wins and 1 loss from 3 games. Here's Hawks coach Sam Mitchell speaking after the match.
There was an intensity about the whole game, right to the last 5 seconds. My son actually texted me and he said I wasn't sure we'd won until 8 seconds to go. And it felt like that in the game.
The NRL's multicultural round kicked off last night and the Bulldogs survived a thrilling late Raiders surge to win in 14-10 in Canberra last night. Now, with under a minute left on the clock, Raiders half Ethan Sanders broke the line before Bulldogs fullback Connor Tracy made a game-winning tackle just a metre out from the try line. A Jacob Preston try in the 72nd minute gave the Bulldogs an 8-point lead to deny Ricky Stewart a happy ending in his 300th game as Canberra's coach. To football now, and Matilda's defender Steph Catley says Japan will pose a big challenge for her team in tomorrow night's Asian Cup final in Sydney. During the tournament, Japan has scored 28 goals and conceded only 1. Catley, Australia's vice-captain, believed the difficult path Tilly's embarked on to make the grand final was great preparation for Japan.
You know, anything can happen. I've played in so many finals where my team's been the underdog and everyone's not given us a chance or written us off, and, you know, we've come out and won. So it's football and anything can happen, and we're a great footballing side and we back ourselves and we're absolutely ready. And
in tennis, Talia Gibson is through to the second round of the Miami Open after a straight sets win over Czechia's Sara Balic. Now, the Miami Open is often referred to as an unofficial Grand Slam. Now, fresh off making the Indian Wells quarterfinals, the Aussie snapped Balic's 8-match winning streak to drop just 1 game to win 6-1, 6-love in 69 minutes. And on the men's side, James Duckworth lost to Roberto Bautista Agut in 2 tiebreaker sets.
Johnson Raela, thank you. And there is more on the ABC News app and, of course, on ABC iView. I'm Kathryn Robinson. Thanks for your company this last hour. Coming up on the ABC News channel, we are expecting a news conference from the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen. We will bring that to you as soon as it begins. We'll also have the latest on Tropical Cyclone Raela.